Floods, landslides and earthquakes. It's been that sort of week for Sri Lanka. Good evening and welcome. This is BizFirst Review 360. I'm Ramesh Yogalvandara. Before we head into your business news tonight, let's take a look at the inclement weather conditions affecting the island. It's going to be a gloomy few more days for Sri Lanka as the Met Department is predicting more rain, especially in the southwestern parts of the island. Now, torrential rains have already claimed the lives of over 40 people and displaced nearly 300,000 people due to floods and landslides. In the wake of this national disaster, Newsfirst joined the Sirsa Shakti John Keel's Brandix Sahanayatra to provide immediate relief to people affected by the flash floods and landslides.
With heavy rain hampering rescue operations, hope for the survival of around 150 people believed to be trapped under mud and rubble is fading. Torrential rains have displaced more than 300,000 people from their homes. The irrigation department said that the water levels of the Kalni River are still beyond the usual level. The department noted that the water level as indicated on the Nagam Vidya water gauge stands at 7.3 meters. Sirasa Shakti John Keel Sahanayatra together with Brandix departed Colombo for flood-affected areas with much-needed relief items.
Experts say dealing with effective employment challenges can be a catalyst for increased economic growth in emerging countries. Let's have a look.
An Australian employment services provider, Olympus Solutions, is in Sri Lanka to launch a pilot project aimed at improving job match between employers who require skilled, talented labour and available job seekers. The Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade is funding the project to help improve the economic growth outlook for Sri Lanka.
So particularly for Australia, no more is it about providing more subsistence funding or funding for agricultural water. The Australian government is interested in how can it further trigger or initiate economic growth for Sri Lanka. Because, as they say, when the tide rises, all boats lift. With economic growth comes more opportunity, comes more employment and greater resource.
Nicholas says technology can be a tool to motivate and energize unemployed youth into employment and to become efficient and productive individuals in the labour force.
You heard of gamification? So gamification is a new thrust in training. People love again to engage on their smartphone, and through technology again comes these messages of self-belief, of achievement, of progressing through to goal. So there's one called Strava, one of these smartphone apps. Strava is a bicycle, like a social media device. And through Strava, you can measure your performance against other riders. You get ranked, 1 to 100, how well are you doing? So this shift to social media is something we've captured in the Energize model.
Minister of Development Strategies and International Trade Malik Samarikam says that Sri Lanka is ready for an economic takeoff.
Addressing a German business delegation, Minister Malik Samarikam said that Sri Lanka has adopted a number of measures to restore investor confidence and improve the business climate to make the island attractive for foreign direct investment.
We are in the process of deepening our economic relations with India and Pakistan and negotiating a partnership agreement with China. We are also working towards restoring European Union's GSP Plus status. This would give us preferential access to a market of over 3 billion people. This will enable us to leverage the trade and investment nexus to attract investors who will be able to sell into these large markets on a preferential basis. Sri Lanka now stands ready for economic takeoff and to play a full role as a responsible member of the global community of nations. I am confident that we in Sri Lanka have embarked on a trajectory of accelerated growth and development. This will generate many opportunities for our partners from abroad. That the benefits of investing in Sri Lanka include its resilient economy, supportive government policies, its educated workforce, strategic location and connectivity, preferential access to large markets, fast developing infrastructure an increasingly vibrant business environment.
Head of the German business delegation to Sri Lanka and the Parliamentary State Secretary for Economic Affairs and Energy, Uwe Beckmeyer, said the economic base laid by the government backed by good governance will be significant in boosting foreign direct investment and economic growth.
We in Germany recognized very intensively what's going on here politically. And I think it's very important also to have now a very stable government which established a new economic base with good governance, with reliable conditions to make new businesses. And this is, I think, very important also not only for the members of our delegation, but also for a lot of others are thinking about to make business in Sri Lanka. The members of the government and the members of the delegation will come back to Germany and they will talk about what their experience have had here in your country.
He said there's potential for Germany to provide assistance in vocational training to build capacity of the Sri Lankan workforce.
You can see there's a great level of interest in cooperation with Sri Lanka in many different fields. And I think that's a major untapped potential for stronger bilateral cooperation. Of course, our two countries already have close and vibrant economic relations. There are a lot of companies still here, and they are responsible for more than 10,000 jobs. But we know there's potential to do more. And I think it's both interests of both governments to create more jobs, give more chance to young people, and to create jobs also on a high with a high skill level. I think it's also important for us to train local workforce here in Sri Lanka, and I think it's also a good reputation for the German companies, also to the society here.
Welcome back. You're watching Biz First Review 360 with me, Ramesh Irugal-Bandara. First, it was Volkswagen, then Mitsubishi. And now Suzuki is in trouble over controversial fuel economy testing with auto regulators. Let's have a look at the scandal that has rocked the Japanese automobile industry.
Suzuki Motor Corporation has admitted that it used improper fuel economy testing methods, sending its shares tumbling as a mileage cheating scandal in Japan that has engulfed Mitsubishi Motors Corporation widened. According to reports by Reuters, the automaker has conducted improper fuel economy tests on more than 2 million Japanese vehicles, triggering a 15% plunge in Suzuki shares, Japan's fourth largest automaker. Japanese Suzuki Motor Chairman and Chief Executive Officer Osamu Suzuki said they deeply apologize for not abiding by existing regulations when carrying out tests, but there is no need to amend data. Suzuki specializes in mini vehicles with engines up to 660cc. It gets preferential tax treatment under Japanese law and makes 1 in 3 of all mini vehicles sold in the country. Last month, Mitsubishi made a public confession on mileage cheating. Its president is now standing down. Mitsubishi Motors President Tetsuro Aikawa said he had decided to take full responsibility because regulatory fuel economy test methods and data manipulation were discovered in cars that were developed while he was head of the Research and Development Department.
Staying in news from Japan, Japan's economy has expanded at the fastest pace in a year during the January to March period, but analysts are worried that growth would not be sufficient to dodge a contraction in the second quarter of this year.
Japan's economy dodged a recession in the first quarter thanks in part to a leap year consumption boost, but analysts say the rebound may not be enough to avoid a contraction in the second quarter. With private consumption making only a feeble recovery from last quarter's slump, the data has kept market expectations alive that Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will delay a scheduled sales tax hike next year. The world's third largest economy expanded by an annualized 1.7% during January-March, much more than a median market forecast for a 0.2% increase and rebounding from a 1.7% contraction in the previous quarter. Private consumption was weaker than expected since it was hit by the first tax hike in 2014. Abe raised the sales tax to 8% from 5% in 2014, which tipped the economy into recession. That led Abe to delay a second tax hike to 10% by 18 months.
Time now for Biz First Briefing, a special segment that looks at other stories that made headlines this week. Views on the health of the Sri Lankan economy, that's coming up right after this break. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Biz First Review 360. Central Bank Governor Arjun Mahendran spoke to the Shippers Council this week on the state of the Sri Lankan economy. Here are some of the highlights of that speech.
If you go back into history, just after the British gave over control to our independent leaders, what we've seen essentially, and let's be frank, has been a process of destruction of capital. The nationalization of the tea estates, I think, was the height of that destruction. But before that, you already had the nationalization of banks, you had the nationalization of the bus companies. These were, to a large extent, carried out with political motivation to try and destroy the so-called capitalist class and replace it with, a more native class, which eventually turned out to be an oversized government. That, regrettably, has been the pitfall of this country in terms of achieving that vision of becoming a hub in the Indian Ocean between Singapore and Dubai. It is that mindset that is so important, because the almost 70 years of post-independence history has been episode after episode of trying to impose controls and to force people to do things against their will, which really hasn't made this country as attractive as it should be. Because I suppose at that time, after the land reform, a lot of the foreigners, the Brits in particular, who owned the tea estate, started taking out all their capital. At that time, they brought in this draconian measure that you could actually be imprisoned for just holding $1 of currency outside the country. So that was really, I think, a battering ram which really pushed us off course in terms of our strategy to make this country a hub. We export isn't earning as much as the price of what we import. So with the exception, obviously, of oil prices have come down. That helped a lot last year. And but of course, to the extent that that improved, we then started importing motor vehicles like there was no tomorrow, and that pretty much negated the improvement in the balance of payments as a consequence of oil imports. On the export side, the price of our apparel exports has been pretty flat. I think it looks like our apparel sector has sort of, got stuck at about 5 billion worth of export. I really don't see any prospect of that sector suddenly growing out of that 5 billion worth of annual exports. And the plantation exports have come off because tea prices and rubber prices are down. Coconut barely features anymore. Gemstones pretty much get smuggled out in people's pockets, so that doesn't really add much value. We are struggling here. It's maybe the exports of IT services that probably add a little bit of a flash in the pan, but the structure of exports has remained remarkably solidified, and we haven't seen any new growth sectors coming into the economy for a long time. Even if you look at tea, is that even in volume terms, these are volume numbers, you're seeing a contraction, right? So prices are coming off and people are producing less. And that's worrying, right? So you're in a downward spiral where prices and volumes are collapsing in the plantation sector. And this is raising some real concerns. As a central banker, we are concerned about bank lending to these plantation industries, which in a sense are the bedrock, the heart and soul of large areas of this country. Because if the downward price spiral continues, the banks are not going to recover that money, and we have a problem. A lot of small tea factories simply aren't viable anymore. We should be mothballing them, giving the owners some sort of subsidy to go and do some other stuff, rather than running those factories at a loss if we feel that tea prices are not going to recover. And then, consolidate the larger tea factories and somehow see that on a regional basis you have sufficient capacity. And nobody's looking at that. The minister is just asking us for cash all the time just to throw money at these tea factories and small producers. I think the demographics are kicking in the sense that we've lost a big cohort of workers who've gone abroad. And to the extent that the remaining workers are going into government jobs, that is where the skew starts. This whole business of government job creation is I think, unique in the world. Certainly it hasn't happened on this scale in any country that I know of, except maybe mainland China, but even in China I think it isn't as pronounced as a proportion of the population, right? Having so many people seeking government jobs, and the education system, the types of degrees that are produced in our education system is mostly in the arts side, and even in the sciences side. I noticed the other day, looking at the statistics, there are inordinately large number of bioscience graduates. People who fail to get into medicine go into bioscience, and you have large numbers of them, and they are unemployable, right? So these are some of the structural issues, and they all want government jobs. So they go and work in government hospitals as nurses or orderlies or whatever, if they have a bioscience degree. I have people with degrees applying to be peons in the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. So that huge skew in the workforce to just go and work for the government is something that I think also militates against an infusion of new workers into the labor force for the private sector. So it's a little deeper than just the Termination Act itself. There's a whole edifice of a skew towards government sector employment, which is cultural, it's social, it's difficult to change. And as you know, it brought down a government in 2004 when they tried to bring in a voluntary retirement scheme to the public sector. So it's one of those no-go areas politically, and has to be handled very carefully. I think, at some point we'll have to start importing workers, at least for some of the more labor-intensive sectors of the economy where we want lower wages, because our workforce is simply not willing to take lower wages as part of the equation.
Well, that's all the news we've got for you tonight. If you missed out on any of the segments that we aired today or in the previous weeks, you can log on to www.newsfirst.lk/YouTube and watch our entire bulletin, or you can always log on to our Facebook page, facebook.com/BizFirstReview360. For the Newsfirst team, I'm Ramesh Irugal Bandara, wishing you a great weekend ahead.